Okay, so in the previous video, we talked about these three methods, and we have learned the first two, the SL method and the DB method. So now let's learn how to do the MACRS, the standard method, which is currently used by the US system. So MACRS depreciation, it has two systems. One is called GDS, the other is called ADS. And in our class, we only require the calculation with GDS. Okay, so here is the steps if you want to calculate the depreciation deduction for each year with the MARS with GDS. So first, the annual depreciation, the DK, is a fixed percentage of the cost basis, which means for every DK, you only need to use the B, the cost basis, times a fixed rate. Okay, and for every year, the rate is different. And the rate is a percentage number which is fixed and which is specified by the IRS. So, and it is mandatory for most assets. Okay, so the steps here, we will use some tables. So the first thing is you need to determine the property class. So usually in a given problem, you will be told that there is a property and the type of the property is such, such, and such. And then you need to check in the table to see. The table is table 7-2 in our textbook. You need to check that table and read through those different classes of property, and then you need to determine which class is your specific property. Okay, that's the first thing. And the reason why you want to know the class is you need to figure out the recovery period. This is how many years that property can be is appreciable. Okay, so first thing you need to determine the class of the property by using the table 7-2 and then determine the recovery period in that table. Okay, and let me see if I have an example of table 7-2. So here is the table, and it's called standardized recovery time related to the MACR class lives and recovery period. Okay, so in this table, you will see several columns. The first column is the asset class. That is fixed class number or the index used in the IRS system, and you do not need to know like how the asset class is determined. Okay, you just need to focus on the second one and this column, okay, called the GDS. So the second column is the description of assets. So here is the thing you need to read through and determine what is the class of your asset. For example, if you bought some semiconductors to produce maybe some electronic components, and then you will read through this and then you find, okay, your semiconductors is used for manufacture of electronic components, products, and systems. So that is your class. And then for this class, you need to find out what is the recovery period under GDS system. So here, 5 is number of years that asset can be depreciated. Okay, and you will see here is another system called ADS, and under ADS you have number of years of 6, but here you don't have to worry about this number because we're not going to use that in the later problem solving. Okay, so you need to know, you want to check the class of your property first, and then you want to find out the number of years, the recovery period under GDS column. And let's get back to these steps. So that's the first step. And the second step is you want to obtain the GDS rates, the RK in table 7-3. Okay, so because the reason we want to use this MACRS method is we want to calculate the DK, the depreciation deduction for every year. Okay, so and we said this method specifically it's based on the assumption that DK is always calculated by the cost basis times a fixed ratio of that year. So now you need to determine what is the ratio for each year, the rates, GDS rates, which is the RK. And you're going to check table 7-3 to get this RK. Okay, so let's see. This is the table 7-3. So it is the GDS recovery rates, the RK, for the 6 personal property classes. So here we have 7 columns. The first column is the number of year. So you have year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. So that is just the year your property is depreciated. And then you have another 6 columns under the depreciation rate for recovery period section. Okay, so for example, you have 3 year, which means you are looking at a property which has 3 years as its recovery period. And so whenever in the problem you find out that your property is for example under a class, and then the GDS life is 3 years, for example this one, then you need to check this table for the column of 3 years, and then you will find this these numbers 0.33, 0.44, and so on. That is the rate, the RK. Okay, so if you want to calculate the BVK for the first year, if you want to calculate the D for the first year, you just need to use the B times this R1. So this is the R1 for the property under the 3-year period, recovery period. Okay. And let's get back to the steps. So whenever you find out all the RKs for each year for that property, you can calculate the D1 through DK. And then compute depreciation deduction in year K by multiplying the asset's cost basis, the B, by the appropriate recovery rate. So B times RK, that is your DK. Okay, and whenever you know all the DKs, you can easily find out the BVK and the DK star. Okay, so that is all for this method, which is very easy to use. So now let's take a closer look at these two tables. So still table 7-2 is where you can find out the class of your property and the according recovery period of that class. Okay, so in this table, you can tell that things are depreciated according to their classes. Okay, so different class, they have different depreciation recovery period. For example, the office furniture and equipment, the first class, it has 7 years depreciation recovery period. So you can depreciate it, this type of equipment or asset for 7 years. Okay, but for something like tractor units for use over the road, okay, so it has shorter recovery period, which is only 3 years. Okay, which makes sense because the tractor units, they might be worn very fast, so it won't have that long time to depreciate. Okay, and but for furniture, it can maintain for a longer time, and so the useful life is longer, so the GDS recovery period is of course longer than the tractor. Okay, and then let's take a look, petroleum refining. Okay, this type of class, it has a GDS for 10 years, the recovery period. It's even longer. And let's see, for this class, the electric utility steam production plant, that recovery period is much longer. It's 20 years. Okay, so you can tell that different classes, they have different recovery period. And then the government decides how long a type of property will last. So this number of years, it's only determined by the government, the IRS, not by anybody else. Okay, and third, there are two systems here. The first system is GDS, which is the one we are talking about, and the other system is called ADS, Alternative Depreciation System. This is just another system you can use for a different types of situation. But here in this class, we won't require you to use that ADS method. And usually ADS method is used for a specific type of products. Sometimes the product is manufactured not in the US, maybe in a foreign country, and the IRS will require you to use the ADS method to do the depreciation deduction calculation. And okay, the fourth thing about this table is in the problem, you will be told that what type of property it is and which depreciation system to use. Okay, so in the problem, in your homework or in the final, you will be told that what type of asset you're looking at, and then what type of system or methods you want to use, the GDS or ADS. But here we only require the GDS method. Okay. And then let's take a closer look at the table 7-3, where you can find out the R case. So here, the reason why you want to use the table to find out RK is that under the MACRS, the method requires you to calculate the DK using this formula. So for each year, the depreciation deduction is B, the basis, the cost basis, times the RK. Okay, so in this table, the number in the first row is the R1, and this is R2, R3, R4, R5, and so on. Okay, and for the products, for the assets, which has the recovery period of 3 years, it only has 4 R's. And for the ones under the 5-year column, it only has 6 rows. You might wonder that, wait, why the 3-year depreciable products would have R4? What happened to the 4th year? Because it only can be depreciated for 3 years. Why do you have R for the 4th year? Okay, and the same thing, you can find out that for the 5-year column, you have 6 rows. So what happened to the 6th year? Because by the definition of 5-year depreciation period, the product or the asset can only be depreciable for 5 years. Then what happened to the 6 years? To the 6th year, okay? And then the same thing, you will find out that under the column of 7-year, you will have a R8. So for every column, you will have one more R, okay? One more than the period recovery period. So why we have a system like that? Why do we have one more year depreciation? Okay, so that is this bullet point. So value, no, not that one. This one. For n years recovery period, MACRS schedules extend over n plus 1 years because of the half-year convention. So what is half year convention? We will talk about it later. Okay, and so this is one strange thing about this table. And so but all of the numbers in one column, they will add up to 1. Okay, so this bullet point, values in each column add up to 1, which means the whole value of that asset will be recovered or will be depreciated. Okay, which is a good thing, right? Which means you used up that asset. Although maybe at the end you still can sell it for a second-hand market, maybe it's still workable, but you have all the price already depreciated, which is good for you. Okay, and the annual depreciations decrease over time. Yeah, because you can see that the rate is decreasing, right? It starts from a higher value, and then it goes down to a lower value. Okay, except the first year. You can tell that the first year's depreciation rate, the R, is smaller than the second year. Why? Okay, so strange things about this table. So now let's talk about why do we have this setup? Why do we have the first year look the R1 always smaller than R2, and why do we have one more row under each column? Okay, so for the 3-year column, why we have R4? Why we have a recovery rate after the 3 years? Okay, so all of this is because one situation. Okay, that's here. So think about that. Sometimes a company or a business, they can purchase the equipment at any time of the year, right? So you can purchase it at the beginning of the year. I would purchase it at the end of this year, and somebody else would purchase something in the middle of that year. So in a 1 year, business will purchase things in different time at different time spot. So when we talk about the tax, so for example, if we're talking about a tax, okay, we're talking about the depreciation deduction for that year. So for the business who purchased the equipment at the beginning of that year, that makes sense because he has already used 1 year, and the asset is naturally worn for 1 year, so it would be depreciated for that whole year, right? But think about the business who purchased the equipment at the end, maybe the last day of that year. Then it's unfair for him to depreciate the whole year value of that equipment. It's unfair for somebody else, for the business who purchased that equipment at the beginning, because the second business, it hasn't used that equipment at all for that year, right? It's newly purchased at the end of that year. Why would that business depreciate that equipment for the entire year? It's never used. So it's an unfair case, right? So the IRS, in order to make every case even, they said, okay, so everybody, you just depreciate the equipment from the beginning, from the middle of the year. No matter if you purchase that at the beginning or in the end or right in the middle or any time of that year, everybody will depreciate only half year value of that equipment. It sounds fair, okay? But think about that for someone who just bought that at the beginning of that year, isn't he lose another half of the depreciation deduction, right? Because actually he can to depreciate the whole year value, but now he is required to only depreciate the half year value. Then what about the other half year value? So for those half-year value, for those who bought the equipment or asset at the beginning of that year, who lost that half-year depreciation, the IRS will have some number to make it up. How? Well, that is why we have additional row for each column in this table. Okay, so you see, for example, for the 3-year column, the R4 is just a little bit, tiny bit, right? And that tiny bit is used for the person to make up the person the business who loses, who loses the half-year depreciation deduction at the first year, in the first year. Okay, and then the same thing for the column of 5-year, we have R6. That's also a little bit, it's like 5%. Okay, so that 5% depreciation deduction is to make up the loss in the first year depreciation deduction for somebody who actually bought the asset at the beginning of that year. Okay, and then this also explains why we have smaller percentage at the first year. Actually, it's only half of the real percentage of that whole year. Okay, so that's why the R1s are all smaller than R2s, because actually the R1s should be 2 times as the number listed there, which will make it bigger than R2. But in order to have the special case covered, the IRS requires that for the first year, everybody will just depreciate half year value of that asset. Okay, so that's why R1s are smaller than R2s, and that's why we have additional row for each column. So here is an explanation, more detail about half-year convention. Okay, so half-year convention is means all assets placed in service during the year are treated as if use began in the middle of that year, and 1/2 year of depreciation is allowed. Okay, so in the first year, everybody start from the middle of that year, so depreciation only one half year depreciation. And when an asset is disposed of, the half-year convention is also allowed, which means in the year when the asset is disposed of, the depreciation deduction for that year can only be the half-year depreciation deduction. Okay, no matter if you dispose it at the beginning or in the end or in the middle or at any time in that year, that's the same. And if the asset is disposed of before the full recovery period is used, okay, for example, your recovery period is 5 years, but you dispose, or dispose means you just maybe sell it to the second-hand market, you get rid of that. Okay, so if you dispose it before the 5 year, maybe in the 4th year, then only half of the normal depreciation deduction can be taken for the 4th year. Okay, so in which year you dispose your asset, in that year you only can have the half-year depreciation deduction. Okay, so that's the rule. The government don't want to let you deduct too much depreciation at the first year you purchase a property. So that is why the R1s are smaller than R2s. They only allow for half of the depreciation for the first year. Okay, so this is the half-year convention. Now let's take a look at this example. So MACRS depreciation with GDS. That's the method you want to use. A firm purchased and placed in service a new piece of semiconductor manufacturing equipment. So this is the type of asset you're looking at, semiconductor manufacturing equipment. The cost basis for the equipment is 100,000. That is the B. Okay, so determine A, the depreciation charge permissible in the fourth year, which is the D4. The BV at the end of the fourth year, so BV4. The cumulative depreciation through the third year, D3 star. The BV at the end of the fifth year, if the equipment is disposed of at that time, BV5. And look at this. The equipment is disposed of at that time, which means for the fifth year, your depreciation can be only the half-year depreciation, okay? So the B is given as 100,000, and the D4, so D4 should be B times R4, right? So in order to determine the R4, we need to first know what is the class of this asset, what is the recovery period, and then we check the table 7-3 for R4. So now the first thing is to check the class. So read through the description and you can find out that semiconductor is the manufacturer of electronic components, products and systems. And under that, your GDS column, you will have the 5, that is your recovery period, okay? And then go to this table and find out the column of 5 year. Stop. 不可以都拿出来。So under this column, you want to find out the R4, okay? So R4 is this one, the fourth row under that column. It's 0.1152. Okay, go back here, and B is 100,000, R4 is 0.1152. So the D4 is 11520. Okay, and then what is BV4? BV4 is B minus D1 minus D2 minus D3 minus D4, right? The cost basis minus the depreciation deduction for every year until the fourth year, okay? So B is 100,000. What is D1? D1 is B times R1. And D2 is B times R2. D3 is B times R3. D4 is B times R4. Okay, now let's go back to check this table. So R1, R2, R3, and R4. That's all the rates you want to use. Okay, so B is 100,000 times R1 is 0.2. R2 is 0.32. R3 is 0.1920. Okay. And R4 is 0.1152. Okay, and all of this will give you $17,280. Okay, and then you want to find out D3K. D3K is what? Is the sum of the D1, D2, D3. Okay, the cumulative deduction. through year K. D1 is what? Is B times R1. D2 is B times R2. D3 is B times R3. Okay? And we just find out this here. So you just copy that over here without the negative sign. And that is 71,200. Okay, and then let's talk about BV5. BV5 is B, you can use B minus the sum from year 1 to year 5, DI, okay? You can also use BV4 minus D5, which is easier because we have already calculated BV4, okay? So BV4 is 17,280. And what is D5? D5 should be B times R5. Okay? But here, are you going to use this R directly? You can't, because it is stated that the equipment is disposed of at the end of the fifth year, at the end of the fifth year. So by the requirements of half-year convention, you can only take half-year depreciation deduction of that year. So here you have to make it a half. Okay. This is why you want to make it half. So it's 17,280 minus 100,000 times 0.1152, which is the R5 in the table, but you can only use half of it because of the half-year convention. Okay, so that will give you 11,520. Okay. Okay, so that is all about the depreciation deduction. And in the next class, we're going to talk about the tax and all the important technique to calculate the taxable income and the tax you owed to IRS. Okay, all right. So this is for today's class. I'll see you next Monday.